This is the tragic story of Nana Agyemang Prempeh I, an Asante king who sought peace but faced relentless opposition from the British. Desperate to control the Asante Kingdom, the British incited division among the Asante people, turning blacks against blacks, brothers against brothers, kings against kings, and tribes against tribes. While Nana Prempeh I awaited peace, he was betrayed and captured by British soldiers, along with over 50 royals. They were exiled to Seychelles Island, and to this day, his descendants remain there. This is the story of a great king who sacrificed his own freedom and that of his family for the well-being of his nation, only to be met with treachery and exile. Join us as we delve into the compelling history of Nana Agyemang Prempeh I and the Asante Kingdom. According to legends, Nana Agyemang Prempeh I became Asante king in March 1888, initially taking the stool name Kwaku Dua III, which was later changed to Prempeh I. Before he became king, a civil war occurred, and some chiefs who did not support him continued to cause trouble in the Asante Kingdom. The chiefs opposing him were supported by British soldiers because they viewed Agyemang Prempeh as a young and energetic king who resisted British influence and deceitful tactics. The British, desperate to control the Asante Kingdom, incited these chiefs to fight against Prempeh, creating divisions within the kingdom. This strategy, known as divide and rule, aimed to weaken the Asante Kingdom by pitting its leaders against each other. Despite their efforts, the British could not succeed initially, but remained relentless in their pursuit. This pattern of inciting internal conflict to weaken and control a nation is common in Africa. It mirrors what happened in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, where similar tactics were used to set Ghanaians against their leader, ultimately leading to his overthrow. When Britain or any colonial power seeks to bring about your downfall, they often do so by manipulating your own people against you, making it extremely difficult to escape their traps. The states that opposed his installment were Kokofu, Mampon, Nsuta, Adansi, and Dadiase. The states that supported him were Kumasi, Bekwai, Damping, Ejeso, Ofinso, and Nkoranza. Edwesohene was the war general for Nana Prempeh I's side during the Civil War. After the war, his stool position was elevated to a higher status. Other Asona towns in the Asante Kingdom, which were scattered but had been serving Kumasi directly, were all brought under Ejeso, as requested by Nana Dikopim. Nana Dikopim's request did not happen during Nana Osei Tutu I's time, because the scattered Asona towns opposed it. Oral tradition says Yao Achirwana's supporters were defeated. They abandoned their towns. Kokofu, who crossed the Pra River into the British Protectorate. Those from Mampon and Nsuta moved to Atabubu. Some people from Mampon even considered becoming British subjects. This involvement of Britain in the internal conflicts of the Asante Kingdom demonstrates their influence and strategic manipulation. When the opposing chiefs were defeated, they sought protection from the British soldiers, revealing the extent to which Britain had interfered in Asante affairs. The British used these internal divisions to their advantage, supporting certain factions to create instability and weaken the Asante Kingdom from within. This tactic of divide and rule was designed to make it easier for them to establish control over the region. The fact that defeated chiefs turned to the British for protection highlights the failed mission of unity within the Asante Kingdom and underscores the British role in perpetuating conflict to serve their colonial interests. The story of these internal conflicts and the subsequent reliance on British protection reflects a broader strategy employed by colonial powers to undermine and dominate African nations. By exacerbating existing rivalries and providing refuge to defeated factions, the British were able to insert themselves into the power dynamics of the Asante Kingdom, ultimately facilitating their colonial agenda. This period coincided with the Scramble for Africa, a time when European powers rapidly colonized and divided the African continent among themselves. The Scramble for Africa occurred in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, driven by various motives. European countries were eager to expand their empires, seeking new markets and raw materials to fuel their growing industries. They also wanted to increase their political and military influence by acquiring more territories. As European nations like Britain, France, Germany and Belgium competed for African land and resources, they often disregarded the existing African societies and their rulers. The British government in particular was determined to colonize the Asante nation as part of its broader strategy to dominate West Africa. To achieve this, the British governor wrote many letters to the Asante Nana Prempeh I, pressuring him to accept British rule. However, Nana Prempeh I did not agree to the governor's demands because these requests were always accompanied by threats. The Asante and his people were wary of losing their sovereignty and being forced into submission by a foreign power. The Asante people valued their independence and had a rich history and culture that they were determined to protect. Accepting the British demands would have meant losing control over their own affairs, their land, and their people. The Scramble for Africa, a period during which European nations rapidly colonized and divided the African continent among themselves, was marked by aggressive tactics. These included both diplomatic pressure and military force to impose control over African territories. The Europeans were driven by economic interests, the desire for political power, and a belief in their cultural superiority. They used treaties, often obtained under duress or through deceit, and followed up with military action when necessary. Nana Prempeh I's resistance was a courageous response to these coercive methods. He understood that agreeing to the British demands would not guarantee peace or security for his people. Instead, it would open the door to further exploitation and domination. His stance reflected the broader struggle of African leaders who sought to maintain their independence and protect their people from the encroaching colonial powers. Even if Nana Prempeh I had agreed to the British demands, the British would have still found ways to take dominion over the Asante nation. The Europeans had already divided Africa among themselves during the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, setting the stage for colonial rule. Any African leader who became an obstacle to their plans was to be removed. The Asante Kingdom, with its wealth and strategic position, was a prime target for British colonization. The British had a clear agenda to control the resources and territories of the Asante Kingdom, and they were willing to use any means necessary to achieve this. The Asante refusal to yield to their demands was an act of defiance against the broader forces of European imperialism. It was a testament to his leadership and his commitment to the sovereignty of the Asante people. According to Kimball, in one of the letters to the Asante, the governor promised to pay the king £600, 600 per year, if he agreed to come under British rule. The governor also promised to pay the chiefs of Mampon, Kokofu, Bekwai, Juaben and the Queen Mothers a total of £1,400 if they agreed to British rule. But if they refused, he threatened to make Yao Agyemang the rival contestant, the Asante. This kind of luring and threatening by the British made Nana Prempeh I and the states confused. The Asante Kingdom had already decided to be friends with the British, which is why the governor was invited to Nana Agyemang Prempeh, the first's installment. However, it was not the British government's job to choose a king for them. Because of the threats, the king appointed an 8-man delegation to go and see Queen Victoria of Britain to have an open discussion about what was happening in the Gold Coast, especially in his kingdom. According to Claridge, the delegation included John Ansa, Albert Ansa, Nana Kwame Botan, Nana Kwaku Fokuo, a linguist, Kwaku Nkrumah, Kwabenabona, Ajapondaban, and Kwajo Tufur. The governor tried to persuade them to stop their journey and discuss everything with him, since he represented the Queen of Britain in the Gold Coast. They did not agree with the governor's suggestion and left for England because of the many threats in the governor's letters to the king. They wanted to hear directly from the Queen, not her representative. They were ready to explain their customs to the Queen to bring about peace. The governor bluntly told them that the Queen would not welcome them, but they thought it was just another threat. They didn't realize that the Asantehene had been portrayed as a cruel king who enjoyed human sacrifice, so they would not be welcomed by the Queen. Despite this, they insisted on going to see Queen Victoria and boarded a ship to England. When they arrived in England, they tried hard to meet Queen Victoria but were refused. They stayed in England for 6 months, making every effort to see the Queen, but all their attempts failed. During this time, the governor in the Gold Coast, Mr. Branford Griffith, was replaced by Mr. William Maxwell. The new governor was instructed to send the following message to Nana Agyemang Prempeh I. 1. That he should permit the presence of British resident representative in Kumasi. 2. He should open his trade routes to everyone and allow free trade in the Asante Kingdom. 3. He should stop human sacrifice. 4. He should honor the Formena Treaty by paying the government £175,000 sterling, equivalent to 50,000 ounces of gold as stated in the treaty. 5. He should allow any state in his kingdom that wished to leave and come under British rule to do so without intimidation. Such a state would be welcomed by the government. Governor Maxwell wrote a letter with these points to Nana Prempeh I and gave him a few days to reply. 8 days after the deadline, Nana Prempeh I replied, saying he had received the letter but could not give a full response until his messengers returned from Britain. When the governor received this reply, he decided to use force to bring the Asante nation under British control. The messengers returned to the Gold Coast in December 1895 without seeing the Queen. When the delegation arrived in Accra, they saw the governor preparing to send an expedition to Kumasi. Afraid of the consequences, they met with the governor and agreed to let a British representative come to Kumasi. They accepted all the terms in the governor's letter and asked him to cancel the plan to send troops to Kumasi. The governor refused their request, stating he needed to see Nana Prempeh I himself. He said he would come to Kumasi with his troops, and if Nana Prempeh I was unhappy with this, he should meet him at Praso to negotiate a new treaty and pay the expenses of the soldiers. Since the governor did not agree to their request, the delegation immediately returned to report to the king and the Asante people. Upon hearing the news, the Asante people waited for the governor's arrival. According to Claridge, Nana Prempeh I and his chiefs decided not to fight the British again. While waiting, Nana Prempeh I dressed 2 of his children and sent them as hostages to the governor at Adansi Praso, hoping this would make the governor and his soldiers turn back. However, some black people against the Asantes had informed the governor that the Asantes did not inherit through the paternal line, so he refused the offer. Nana Prempeh I then sent his linguists, Nana Fokuo, and Nana Boatan to plead with the governor to return, saying he had accepted all the terms in the letter. The governor refused again and continued with his men. On January 11th, 1896, the governor, Sir Francis Scott, and his troops crossed the River Pra. They were met by the chief of Bekwai, Yao Boateng, and the chief of Abodom, who made a treaty with him and agreed to become British subjects. According to Claridge, after the treaty, the governor gave flags to the chiefs, and one was raised in the chief's palace in Bekwai. The chief of Adansi, Nana Kwaku and Kansa I, had accepted British protection earlier on October 18th, 1895. The British made the Fomena chief the overlord of the entire Adansi state until other paramount chiefs were appointed. When Nana Prempeh I and the remaining chiefs learned that some chiefs in the Asante Kingdom had already joined the governor, they decided to accept the British flag. They waited for the governor to arrive so they could officially tell him that the Asante nation accepted British rule and needed a British representative in Kumasi. When Nana Prempeh I heard that the soldiers would reach Kumasi on January 17, 1896, he called all his chiefs to a big meeting to welcome the governor, William Maxwell. The king and his elders arrived at the meeting place at 9 o'clock in the morning to wait for the governor. They waited until 5 o'clock in the evening before hearing that the governor would arrive the next day, January 18th, 1896. On January 17th, 1896, the British Army was advancing towards Kumasi along 3 different paths. Occasionally they captured armed Asante men hiding in the bushes, but there was no resistance to the British advance. One interesting incident boosted the spirits of the British soldiers who had started to lose hope of encountering a fight. Major Gordon, leading the right flank, received a crumpled piece of paper with threatening words, which caused much discussion in the camp until someone found Major Gordon's faint pencil receipt note on it. They then remembered that a piece of fresh meat had been sent to Major Gordon 2 days earlier with that same label. A few miles behind Major Gordon's troops came the main army, led by Hausas, Fantes, Adansi, Bekwai, and the Special Service Corps, along with their long supply line of ammunition and medical supplies, stretching about 9 miles. The task of the advanced British troops was to clear the road for the main troops, but there was no time to build huts as they had done before. Instead, the soldiers had to make bush shelters or pitch tents. Unfortunately, a severe storm hit the British camp on the night of January 17th, 1896. Heavy rain and thunder caused chaos in the camp, forcing everyone to get an early start the next morning, though they were soaked and miserable. Despite the tough conditions, the soldiers remained in good spirits as they prepared for the final march to Kumasi. Reports circulated in the British camp that the main Asante army planned to resist them at the gates of Kumasi, to make a final stand, and if defeated, to blow up the city and scatter into the bush. Gates, city, and King's Palace all sounded impressive, but what did they actually find? As the British soldiers moved through the thick, tall elephant grass along a narrow footpath dotted with fetish dolls, they got closer to Kumasi, the capital of the Asante Kingdom. As they cautiously approached, they could hear drums beating loudly all around. The British army passed through clusters of mud huts with patches of tall jungle grass between them. Finally, they reached an open area about 200 yards wide, with more huts and thatched roofs beyond. They had arrived in Kumasi. Graham sent scouts beyond the town to guard the approaches, while the main British army moved towards the Durbar ground. The drumming in Kumasi grew louder and the sound of voices filled the air, but thankfully it was peaceful drumming. Colourful umbrellas were soon seen bobbing above the crowd. Stool bearers ran ahead, followed by spinning dancers in yellow skirts. Huge drums decorated with human skulls boomed, and elephant tusk horns added to the noise. The Asante Nana Prempeh I, and his chiefs came out to greet the British troops. They arranged themselves in a long line, with the umbrellas forming a row of booths where the chief sat on brass-nailed chairs, surrounded by their courtiers. This gathering started at 9 o'clock in the morning and lasted until 5 o'clock in the evening. The soldiers who arrived in Kumasi on January 17, 1896, included 1,322 whites and 1,800 blacks, made up of Hausas, Fantes, and men from Bekwai and Adansi. According to legends, the British claimed they had seen the Asante Kingdom on the same durbar ground before, but never without the sight of blood. This open space was not typically used for parading troops, but for human sacrifice. It seems orders were given to the Asante people to clean away all signs of their old traditions and customs before the British arrived, and not to speak of these practices to the white men. However, with a bit of questioning, the truth came out. While the British troops were on the parade ground, one soldier peeked into the nearby bush and found trees supporting a flock of healthy-looking vultures, and there he discovered human skulls and bones. When the British arrived in Africa, they often condemned practices like human sacrifice, portraying them as barbaric and evil. However, it is important to recognize that such practices were not unique to African cultures. They were also present in European history, including among the ancient Britons. For instance, the Druids, the priestly class of the ancient Britons, performed human sacrifices to appease their gods, such as Taranis, the god of thunder, and Teutates, the god of war and fertility. The famous Lindo man discovered in England is a well-preserved example of a ritualistic sacrifice. Human sacrifice was a common practice across various cultures, serving religious, social, and political purposes. In Europe, it was part of a belief system that sought to ensure the favor of deities, maintain social order, and achieve victory in conflicts. The same motivations were evident in African cultures, such as the Asantes, who conducted sacrifices as part of their religious rituals and to maintain social cohesion. The British portrayal of African practices as uniquely barbaric was not only hypocritical, but also served to justify their colonial agenda. By depicting African traditions in a negative light, they sought to legitimize their own cultural and political dominance. This narrative ignored the fact that human sacrifice was a widespread historical phenomenon, practiced by many societies, including the British themselves. It is essential to understand these practices within their historical and cultural contexts rather than through a lens of moral superiority. Both European and African societies engaged in human sacrifice for similar reasons, reflecting a shared human history of seeking to influence the divine and maintain societal order. Thus, the Asantes should not be singled out as evil for a practice that was common across human civilizations. Asante Nana Prempeh I was present on the Durbar ground as three dwarfs dressed in scarlet danced before him, surrounded by a dense crowd of sword-bearers, court-criers, fly-catchers, and other officials. Nana Prempeh I looked majestic, sitting on a high throne under a large velvet umbrella, wearing a black and gold crown, with large golden beads and nuggets around his neck and arms. At that moment, a small group of British forces hurried across the ground, 3 white soldiers and 4 natives carrying a reel and laying a field telegraph, if the previous day's storm hadn't destroyed the line in several places. The arrival of the British forces in Kumasi would have been reported back home within minutes. Despite this setback, Captain Curtis and his telegraph section had worked quickly and efficiently, although many, including Curtis, were in the hospital with fever. The advanced guard of the Hausa troops led the way, followed by the Special Service Corps, who, despite being wet and pale, marched strong and well to their places on parade. The 7-pounder guns came close behind, carried on bamboo poles. The troops were greeted with cheers from those already at the durbar ground. When Governor William Maxwell arrived in Kumasi on January 18, 1896, he was informed that Nana Prempeh I and his men were waiting for him at the durbar grounds. Maxwell sent a message to Nana Prempeh I, saying he was tired, and asked them to return home and reconvene on January 20, 1896. Nana Prempeh I and his elders had planned to meet Governor Maxwell to formally accept British rule and have the governor introduce the British resident representative for Asante. However, they were unaware of the governor's true intentions and the reason he had brought so many troops with him. Another durbar was held for Governor William Maxwell on the appointed day. The king and his chiefs arrived early in the morning. To their surprise, they saw soldiers everywhere. The soldiers began separating the chiefs from their supporters, allowing only the chiefs and a few of their elders to go to the chief's stand. This made Nana Prempeh I and his chiefs sense danger. After a while, the governor arrived at the durbar grounds and greetings were exchanged. Then the governor delivered his message. He invited the king and his people to accept British rule in their country. He also mentioned that the king and his subjects had not kept the terms of the Treaty of Fomena, which required them to pay 50,000 ounces of gold. The king and his chiefs were shocked by this message, as they had not expected the governor to come to collect debts. In this state, John Ansah, the leader of the Asante delegation to Queen Victoria in London, went to Nana Prempeh I and whispered something to him. A few minutes later, for the first time in Asante history, Nana Prempeh I removed his sandals and golden headgear in public. He and the Queen Mother approached the governor, prostrated themselves, and pleaded with him to ease the demand for the full payment of 50,000 ounces of gold, 1,217,500 grams, as required by the Treaty of Fomena in 1874. After returning to their seats, the king declared that he and his subjects had accepted British rule from that day forward. Regarding the payment, the king said he would pay the 50,000 ounces of gold, but did not have the funds at that moment. He offered to pay 600 ounces of gold, equivalent to £2,000 sterling. The government did not accept this amount. He insisted that if the king could afford to send a delegation to England, he should be able to pay the full amount. When the governor waited and the money was not paid, he ordered the arrest of the king, the Queen Mother, the king's father, his brother, 2 heirs to the throne, 2 linguists, the king's interpreter, the chiefs of Bantama, Asafo, Mampong, Ofinso, Edweso, and some of the king's wives and servants. Records indicate that 55 royal family members were arrested. In 1896, the British arrested Nana Prempeh I after he refused to accept a monthly payment for British colonization. Nana Prempeh I also refused to plunge the Asante nation into another war with the British, choosing to sacrifice his and his family's independence for the well-being of the Asante nation. The Asante Kingdom allowed Nana Prempeh I to be deported rather than risk losing a war and the Golden Stool. On their way to Elmina Castle, the British and the arrested Asante king passed through Adansi Monsi. The village, named for its location in a valley, connected Cape Coast, Elmina, and other coastal towns to Kumasi, the capital of the Asante nation. While in Adansi, the king, surprised by his arrest given his power and the strength of the Asante Kingdom, remarked, "Brofo Yedru, whites are strong." To honor the king, the village's name was changed to Adansi Brofoyedru. After the arrest, Nana Prempeh I and his people were first taken to Cape Coast Castle, then moved to Elmina Castle. They were eventually deported, first to Sierra Leone on January 1, 1897, and later to Seychelles Island in the Indian Ocean in 1901. The British feared that the Asantes might attempt to rescue their king, as many were travelling long distances to visit him in Sierra Leone. According to Claridge, when Nana Prempeh I was arrested, 3 chiefs, Kwaku Nanchui, Nana Opoku Mensa, Obuabasa, and Kwame Afrifa, were appointed to administer the Kumasi state. Separate treaties were made with other states, bringing them directly under the chief commissioner as independent states. These states included Bekwai, Agona, Ofinso, Agyemang, Nsuta, Mampon, Kumawu, Bompata, Kokofu, Adansi, and Dwaban. Each state's chief was to establish their own court and try cases, but only the government could impose capital punishment. The first resident commissioner appointed to administer the Asante nation was Major Piggott. The arrest and exile of Nana Prempeh I serve as a stark reminder of the lengths to which colonial powers went to suppress resistance and assert control over African nations. The British strategy of divide and rule was evident in how they manipulated internal divisions within the Asante Kingdom, turning chiefs and tribes against each other to weaken the overall unity of the state. By deporting the king and breaking the Asante nation's leadership, the British ensured that any organized resistance would be significantly hampered. Furthermore, by eliminating a king who never followed their deceitful tactics and greedy means, the British managed to replace Nana Prempeh I with people they could control. This allowed them to extract more gold and enslave more Africans. Their mission was accomplished since they had their own puppet rulers in Asante, and the fearless King Prempeh I was in exile. About 28 years later, they brought him back to Asante, but by then many things had changed, which we will discuss later. This tactic of dividing and ruling is not just a relic of the past, but continues to manifest in various forms today. African leaders and nations must remain vigilant against external influences that seek to exploit internal divisions for their gain. The lesson from Nana Prempeh I's ordeal is clear. Unity and self-love among African people are crucial for resisting external manipulation and maintaining sovereignty. The exile of a king and the imposition of foreign rule over the Asante Kingdom were tragic outcomes of colonial ambition. Nana Prempeh I's willingness to sacrifice his freedom for the sake of his people underscores the resilience and dignity of African leaders who stood against colonial oppression. His story is a call to all Africans to recognize and resist the tactics that have historically been used to weaken them. Africans must wake up to the reality that these divisive strategies are still in play. The only way to safeguard the continent's future is through unity, mutual respect, and a commitment to collective well-being. By learning from the past and fostering a sense of solidarity, African nations can overcome the remnants of colonial manipulation and build a future based on cooperation and shared prosperity. Nana Prempeh. The first story is not just a historical account. It is a powerful reminder of the importance of unity and the dangers of division. Let us honor his legacy by rejecting divisive tactics and working together for a stronger, more united Africa. To learn more about the fascinating history of Nana Prempeh, the first and other significant events, stay tuned to Anant's Web of Tales by subscribing to our channel. We truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to like, share, and keep watching Anant's Web of Tales for more intriguing stories and historical insights. Thank you.